The empathy is number one for me. I learned that having worked in actually the mental health field for years before I got into tech. First, let them share their perspectives, really actively listen to what they have to say, as opposed to just being prepared to respond. We can, especially in the challenging times, utilize empathy as a skill, right? Tactical empathy, if you will, to help serve others. Each one of our team members bring a different culture and personality, and we want to recognize that, honor it, certainly, but also be intentional in the things that we do.
Jerod is a humble, down-to-earth leader who understands that leadership is about service. It's about service to those who he leads, service to his consumers, and service to his organization. But he utilizes EQ to build relationships, accountability as a way to motivate, achieve goals in every situation with amazing results. Let's welcome Jerod on 10 Minutes of Hiring Wisdom, where he will tell us what it's like to be a leader of a top, fast-growing company, what he's learned along the way, and what we can learn from his learning. Hi, Jerod. How are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful, Minal. Thank you. How are you?
I am doing well. So, Jerod, let's get started. First, because you're responsible for a global team, I would love to understand what it's like managing cross-functional teams all over the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's wonderful, but it's a challenge. So I love the diversity that falls within our team. Anything from the team members to the cultures and customs, right? And anything from the professional behaviors and characteristics, right? There's just so much to learn and grow from, but it's also quite challenging. And that's anything from working across multiple time zones and scheduling meetings to in-persons. We do a lot of in-person conferences and meetings around the globe as well, too. So there's always challenges in regards to the logistics behind that.
Okay. I think a follow-up question with that is, when you work with diverse teams, it's amazing because it brings up the best ideas. But then again, you always need to be culturally sensitive to other cultures because you might not understand what something might mean to other people because it might not be a big deal in your own culture. So how do you walk through those different cultural nuances to make sure that you're actually including everyone in a way where they feel welcome?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's something as leaders and managers we all need to be fully cognizant of, right? I think always keep in the back of our minds, number one, that each one of our team members bring a different culture and personality, and we want to recognize that, honor it, certainly, but also be intentional in the things that we do, right? So if it's anything from having meetings over Zoom or even in person, you want to understand the cultures and customs of each team member. And sometimes certain cultures don't speak up, whereas other cultures can be perhaps more aggressive. And as a leader, I need to recognize that and give those that aren't perhaps as vocal an opportunity to speak up. And maybe it's not in the meeting, but it's after the fact via writing or email communication to myself, right? So there's lots of ways to be inclusive around that. But again, I keep going back to this idea of we have to be cognizant of it as leaders and intentional in the steps that we take in order to ensure that we're getting contribution from everyone across the org. If that's not happening, at the end of the day, that's really on the manager and the leader of the team.
No, I think I love that because a lot of companies do claim that, okay, they are focused on DEI, but when it comes to actually implementing different strategies, different steps within the organization, you don't see a lot of work being done. And a lot of people eventually don't feel like they belong to a company. And eventually, sometimes they even leave the company to find that company where they can call essentially home. So thank you so much for sharing that. My next question for you would be is, because you're a leader of a big company, according to you, what are some of the top 3 characteristics leaders should have to ensure that they can be role models for the employees beneath them?
Great question. Top 3 characteristics. So I fall back on 2 immediately. It's all over my LinkedIn. I speak about it all the time. Empathy is number one for me. I learned that having worked in actually the mental health field for years before I got into tech. Empathy is a requirement of the job in social services and serving your community in a role like that in a mental health clinic. So I was able to really kind of build that muscle in terms of understanding how important it is to recognize someone and understand them at their own level. And I'd like to think I've taken that into my career in tech. And then as I transitioned into more management and leadership, this ability to, no matter where someone is at that day, right, but recognizing that, understanding them, and really trying to meet them at their level first and foremost before we get into the agenda that I have for the day, or that perhaps even the agenda they have. I think sometimes it just generally helps to kind of understand where people are coming from, and then taking that ongoing with your team during meetings. And I think always, if you're always empathetic with someone, it's kind of a win-win situation, right? And you generally are going to kind of get what you need out of the conversation when showing empathy as well too. So that's one. Accountability is another one. I think accountability is extremely important. I learned that on a personal level many years ago, and I'd like to think I've taken that into my professional career as well too. Holding others accountable, ensuring that they feel empowered to hold me accountable as their manager, which is just as important. And then holding ourselves accountable. It's kind of a three-way prong is how I look at it. We all need to hold ourselves accountable. And when you have empathy and you have accountability, I think you're going to have a winning team, winning process, winning service, product, whatever that is. I mean, I guess, and the final one I would say is if you can, it's passion for the work that you do, passion for, if you're a manager, passion for serving others and being that leader. And if it's individual contributor, passion for the work that you're doing that's hopefully contributing to a larger goal.
Oh, well, I think the mental health aspect specifically, tying it down with empathy, is so important. Because for the longest time, I think tech was known as a cold industry where people just come, work on their own. There's no collaboration. But I think the pandemic shifted the way people think. People are like, okay, I am working, but am I working for something bigger than myself? Am I working for a purpose? So that's when people started thinking. That's when people started questioning their career, their life choices. And it's great to see that leaders like you are on a mission to make sure that the environment that they create is an environment created belonging, ensuring that people feel welcome. So hats off to you, Jerod, for actually understanding and recognizing that and taking active measures to make sure that people feel welcome. So thank you for sharing that. A follow-up question, Jerod, would be what is missing today, according to you, in the workforce today? You touched on purpose and passion, but I would love for you to go deep into that and explain from your perspective, what is missing?
Wow, that's a tough question. What is missing? I mean, I think we can always still be more empathetic. I don't want to harp on this. I'm happy to address other things, but I think we can always still be more empathetic. I think all of us, myself included, even though I like to think I'm intentional in it, we can, especially in the challenging times, utilize empathy as a skill, right? Tactical empathy, if you will, to help serve others. So that's certainly one thing I think we could see more of. What else is missing? Some good questions.
I think I would like to dig deep on that. So empathy. Usually people are like the empathy as like there's a quotient, right? There's a spectrum. Some people fall on the EQ component. Some people fall on the IQ component.
Sure.
So people usually are like, okay, it's innate. Some people are just naturally born with empathy. But I mean, I think honestly, people can learn and build on the skills. So if, for example, someone might not be as empathetic and wants to work on their empathy skills, how would you work on it?
I love it. Love the question. You're tugging at my heartstrings. I've taught classes before on this, calling empathy a skill. I've given presentations on how empathy is a skill. And what I mean by that, it's something that you can actually build. So you're spot on, Minal, in that this is something like any other skill attribute. You can build upon it, again, if you're intentional about that. So just some things you can doing. Number one is when you approach conversations, really think about how you approach them, right? Are you going in wanting to get your agenda across, wanting to get your point across? Are you genuinely taking a step back and wanting to hear from that other person first and foremost and their perspective and their ideas, right? If you approach every conversation with that, or at least attempting to do so, that's kind of a good first step. A way to build off of that is then once you're able to kind of do that, you can start trying to remove the thoughts that are in your head and continue to kind of hear out the person, like let them get their points across first, let them share their perspectives, really actively listen to what they have to say, as opposed to just being prepared to respond. I think that's the next step, and that's really challenging for all of us to do. But if you think about it step by step, number one, going in with that intention. Number two, stop worrying about how you're going to respond and just soak it all in from that other person. When you actively listen, People can tell and people appreciate that. And generally, when you do that, you're actually able to get what I call data from that person in order to respond, right, more effectively with them, right? In order to respond where they can actually understand and be like, yeah, you really did hear me. Thank you for that. And I think you build a stronger connection and a bond by doing that. And that's a great way to really build upon this idea of utilizing empathy as a skill.
Okay, now I think you touched upon one of my favorite quotes, which is what the problem with the world is that people don't listen to understand, but people listen to respond.
That's right.
And that's something so important, because at the end of the day, we need to realize that we're all human at the end of the day. We just want someone to listen and understand where we're coming from, rather than giving their opinions on something that we might be facing. Like, it's not necessarily that we usually share things with people just to get advice or anything. Sometimes we just want someone to listen to us and just understand where we're coming from, which is the beauty of active listening itself. So thank you so much for sharing that. Jerod, last question, Jerod. Your company is definitely growing. Your company is definitely hiring. Would love to understand what are some of the roles that you're actively hiring for, so if people are seeking jobs, they know what to seek for.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, great question. Number one, NTT is huge. It's a massive organization, 330,000 plus team members across the world. My division itself is certainly much, much smaller than that. But when you think about the roles that we have here in the US, but also globally, it's almost anything you can imagine. My team specifically is hiring for marketing. We're hiring for sales really at all levels right now. And then certainly some on the engineering side of things too. So for those that are a bit more technical, I believe some software engineering, but also some kind of network engineering as well too for our network operations center. So yeah, it really is across the spectrum. What I'm always happy to do is ask people to connect with me on LinkedIn. And if they see roles that within our organization that they're interested in, I will always make time for that person to at least give them some advice, put in a good word if I know them in my network, right? We've all been given an opportunity by others and networked our way to a job through the community that we have. And I always want to be able to give back in that regard. So because NTT is so big, it's hard to really kind of pinpoint some of the roles. It really depends on what people are looking for. So I always want to be a resource for them. So connecting with me on LinkedIn is always the best way to go about learning more about NTT, or if you have a specific job in mind, I'm always happy to do anything I can to support someone in kind of progressing through the process.
I can definitely see your empathy playing forward and you wanting to make a difference, Jerod. So it's just not that the words that you're speaking, it's just that you're actually putting those words into action, which is something that's much needed. But thank you so much, Jerod, for coming on the show, for sharing what it's like to be an empathetic leader, for understanding that differences can exist when you actually understand people from an empathetic lens, and what it's like being a successful leader, leading teams cross-functionally over the world, and just how empathy can build, especially if you might not have it. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Absolutely, Mel. Thank you very much for having me.